Hello, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar in which I will present the current AAPS Fellows selection process. I'd also like to mention before we begin that there will be an opportunity for all participants to submit any questions that may arise. Hello, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar in which I will present the current AAPS Fellows selection process. I also would like to mention that there will be an opportunity for all participants to submit any questions that may arise during the presentation, and that we will answer them after the presentation. So, my name is Jeff Silverman, and I'm the current chair of the AAPS Fellows Committee. I'm joined today on the line by Steve, who's the immediate past chair of the AAPS Fellows Committee, and also by Venkat, who's the incoming or chair-elect of the AAPS Fellows Committee. AAPS has a strong awards program to recognize the achievements of its members, and amongst those awards is this very prestigious award of AAPS Fellow. Through this award, AAPS recognizes its most outstanding members and their contribution to their respective fields. And the primary criteria for selection to fellow status is the professional excellence in your respective fields relevant to AAPS's mission. It's important for me to mention that this is not a career recognition award. This award is for scientists who are still active and contributing to their fields in the pharmaceutical sciences. And the basis for this selection is an unambiguous documentation of a sustained level of superior and distinguished professional achievement. And it's important that those contributions have impact. Shown here on this slide are some of the metrics from the last 6 years. And as you can see, last year in 2016, 16 nomination packages were received by the AAPS. 15 of those were forwarded to the AAPS Fellows Committee by the sections, and 9 individuals were selected to become an AAPS Fellow. Similar trends can be seen in the previous year. So today I'm going to be outlining the nomination package and review process, but be assured that there is a wealth of information available to you on the AAPS website that you can refer to after this webinar. This webinar will also be available on the website. Shown here is an image of the AAPS website and the pull-down menu on the left-hand side where you can begin to find some of this information. I also want to point out that as a nominator or a nominee, you can always reach out to AAPS, your section leadership, or the AAPS Fellows Committee for help in learning about this process. As I'll describe in a minute, the AAPS Fellows Committee can help you find a suitable advisor that can be assigned to you to help you with this nomination process. I also want to point out that current members of the AAPS Fellows Committee are not allowed or will not help you with construction of the actual package because that would present a conflict of interest. So on the AAPS Fellows website, here's a list of some of the resources that are available to you for developing the nomination package. And first of all, I'd like to point out that very important date that's on the top of the slide. March 31st is the deadline by which all materials and supporting materials need to be submitted to the AAPS. After that date, no materials will be accepted. I also want to point out the first line of that list of information is the AAPS Fellows Handbook. That's a very important document that describes in detail the nomination package, the approval process, and how to construct an effective package. So I urge you to review that important document. Now, and you can see here on the rest of the list some examples that will be available to you to help create your a strong nomination package. So, as I just said, it's very important to follow the requirements in that AAPS Fellows Handbook. Submissions that don't follow those requirements will be rejected without review. So please find that handbook and read it and follow the instructions within it. So some key dates for actually I should say 2017. Today we're having this webinar in which I will describe the process and what makes a strong package. Those packages are due in March. After that, the packages will get reviewed by each section. Nominations that are deemed meritorious will be forwarded to the AAPS Fellows Committee, which will review each package in a face-to-face meeting, which I'll describe in a moment. That happens in June. Nominees deemed meritorious will be forwarded to the Executive Council for approval, and then notification letters will be sent out to each nominator and nominee. Not listed here is that the actual award of fellow status takes place at the annual meeting, which for 2017 is November 15th, 12th to 15th in San Diego. So who's involved in the nomination process? Shown here are the key individuals that are important in this whole process. First of all is the nominator, then the nominee, obviously. 2 or 3 individuals who can write strong letters of recommendation. And as I mentioned, there's the AAPS Fellows Committee advisor. So we strongly recommend that nominators avail themselves of using a Fellows Committee advisor. This is somebody who has been through the process and understands the process and can help you create the strongest package. And as I said, current AAPS Fellows Committee members are not allowed to assist directly in constructing the nomination package, but they will certainly help you find a suitable advisor. So some of the key attributes and requirements and responsibility for nominators are shown here. First of all, nominators must be a current member of AAPS. Now these individuals are responsible for assembling and submitting the nomination package. So obviously they must have a comprehensive knowledge of the nominee and be able to clearly assess that nominee. And typically the nominator will be providing the most comprehensive evaluation of the nominee and his or her contributions. So they must work closely with the nominee, and it is usually the nominator that reaches out for advice from an AAPS Fellows advisor. Some considerations for the nominee. So we strongly suggest that nominees are a member of AAPS for at least 5 years, 5 consecutive years, and that they have been active in his or her scientific area for a sustained period of time. Usually this is reflected in the level of rank within their own organization. Typically, nominees will have achieved the rank of full professor or a corresponding rank in industry or government. Most important is that the nominee should have made identifiable, significant, and specific impactful contributions to the pharmaceutical scientists in whatever field they work in. So now let's turn our attention to the nomination package and the process. First, please consider that the committee members will usually not know the nominee. But even if they do know the nominee, the only information that the nominee will be judged on is the nomination package. So it's very important that these packages are carefully and thoughtfully prepared. And again, the AAPS handbook gives detailed instructions and suggestions on how best to construct this package. So here's a high-level scheme of what happens when a package is created and submitted. So as I'll describe in more detail in a minute, the packages are prepared and then submitted to the AAPS office. Then there's actually two committees that evaluate each nomination package. The first is the Sections Fellows Committee, which does the initial screening of nominees from their own section. And then the second committee is the AAPS Fellows Committee, which reviews those packages that are ranked and evaluated by the sections, all of the sections, and then the AAPS Fellows Committee makes their recommendations to the Executive Council, who then approves the nominees and then communicates that outward to the nominators and nominees, the section leaders, and eventually to the members. So, the Sections Fellows Committee. Sections Fellows Committees actually decide their own best mechanism for assessing applications. Typically, each section has a chair that convenes a small committee or a review panel to evaluate each package. Those evaluations are assigned a priority and a rating, and those materials are provided then subsequently to the AAPS Fellows Committee. Now, at the AAPS Fellows Committee, first of all, I should mention that the AAPS Fellows Committee is made up of the chairs from each of the sections Fellows Committee. And once a year, this committee meets to evaluate the Fellows nomination packages across all sections. So prior to the AAPS, this annual meeting, the AAPS Fellows Chair, myself, will assign each package to members of the committee. They will be reviewed by a primary reviewer and a secondary reviewer prior to the meeting. Each of those reviewers provide their assessment during the meeting. After an initial introduction of the nominee by the section committee chair. So the section committee chair initiates a discussion on each package. Then the primary reviewer will provide their written evaluation and then an oral evaluation. The secondary reviewer will provide their evaluation. Then there's a discussion amongst all members of the committee, and then we hold a vote. Those candidates that are endorsed by the AAPS Fellows Committee are forwarded to the Executive Committee for approval, and reasons for rejection should a nominee not be endorsed are communicated to the nominees and nominators. And as I said, that happens in June, and then the actual award happens at the annual meeting. So now let's turn to the nomination package, this all-important package. First and foremost, the package must highlight the career accomplishments and impact of the nominee. Keep in mind, this package is the only information that will be used in evaluating each candidate. So it must clearly demonstrate several items. And so I put here several questions that you should ask yourself when you're creating this package. What makes a nominee an acknowledged leader in and an outstanding contributor to the pharmaceutical scientists? What are this nominee's most important scientific research accomplishments? And what's the impact of those contributions? All of these issues should come through in the nomination package clearly. So how can that happen? What are the components of the package? First and foremost is that nominator's assessment. I'll go through this in a little bit more detail in a minute, but it should be strong, accurate, thorough evaluation of the nominee's contributions. Then there are the letters of recommendation. We recommend at least 2, but no more than 3 letters. They should be personal, based in the context of the relationship between the nominee and the endorser, and we strongly advise that letters are not written by individuals associated with the nominee's current place of employment. If that's really desired, you should actually discuss this with your fellows advisor and clearly articulate why it's important that such a person is required or needed to write that letter of recommendation. Next is the Curriculum Vitae. That's a pretty standard Curriculum Vitae, perhaps a little more detailed than some Curriculum Vitae, and I'll go over the requirements in a minute. And finally, the Portfolio of Accomplishments, which is clearly a central part of this package. So the nominator's assessment. As I just said, it should be clear and identify the active and sustained achievements with relevant examples. They should identify and validate the candidate's sustained excellence in a specific field or fields. And they should place these contributions into context. Why is it important? Why should anybody care? And how important are those contributions? Letters of recommendation. As I said, they should be specific. Some of the things that may be covered in that is how long has the writer known the candidate and in what capacity. As I said, they should not be from a nominee's current place of employment, and they should be very specific to describe the candidate's contributions and place them in context in a larger field in which they work. So the Curriculum Vitae. As I said, a complete Curriculum Vitae is part of this nomination package. And here are some examples of the contents that we are looking for within that CV. It's not so different than most CVs, but we are looking for these specific things to see a demonstration of sustained level of contribution to your field. One thing I should mention is, or completely point out here, we do want you to make a distinction between peer-reviewed, non-peer-reviewed, and unrefereed references in your publication list. So we would appreciate it if those were separated out from the list of peer-reviewed. So the important central part of the nomination package is this portfolio of accomplishments. It goes into much more detail than the list of accomplishments that are in a typical CV. So there are numerous aspects to the portfolio, and it's intended to provide an accurate and concise evaluation of the contributions, and it must clearly demonstrate the accomplishments or influence of those accomplishments and categories. It should be clear, focused, and persuasive. We ask that you pull out at least 6 key publications representing major contributions and provide a brief explanation of why each of these are regarded as a key contribution to whatever field you work in. And the portfolio should be demonstrating the impact of those contributions. Merely a citation index is not always a measure of importance. If you have patents in your portfolio, please describe your individual contributions to that patent and the importance and impact of that patent. If you've been invited for presentations, that would be important for us to know what type of presentation and to whom that was. If you serve as an editor, associate editor, advisory board member to a journal, that's, again, important to highlight in your portfolio of accomplishments. Organizing symposia, whether they be national, international, again, is something that would be nice and important to highlight. And whether you mentor graduate students or have reports at work or colleagues, your contribution to their careers is also a measure of your success and your impact. Often the success of your students or reports is a reflection of your leadership. Service to a professional organization, scientific organization, is also important to highlight in your portfolio of accomplishments, and any significant service that you've done for those organizations is also supportive in that role. Although we certainly love to see active AAPS Fellows be active in AAPS, and we encourage AAPS Fellows to become and maintain their activity in the organization. An active role in AAPS is supportive but not mandatory to become an AAPS Fellow. So again, if you're some more information in your portfolio, if you hold an adjunct faculty appointment at various universities, that would be important to list. INDs, NDAs, and other regulatory type documents for those in industry are important to list and describe what your contribution to that document is. The level and scope of your managerial responsibilities, if it's applicable, it would be nice to know. How big a group do you lead? What is their role? What's your role within that group? Would all support your portfolio of accomplishments. Then, of course, if you've been awarded any specific scientific awards or recognition, that would certainly lend support to your strong candidacy. So, in conclusion, AAPS has a strong commitment to honoring its members, and they're recognizing their individuals who make outstanding contributions, and who we elevate those individuals with this stature of AAPS Fellow, and particularly for people who demonstrate superior professional excellence. And the sole criteria for evaluation for AAPS Fellows is scientific scholarship and significant contributions to your respective fields that are impactful over a period of time. There exists a clearly defined and rigorous process for evaluation. That's what I'm trying to highlight today, and that a nominee's accomplishments must be thoroughly documented in a complete nomination package. It takes a lot of effort to put these packages together, so please follow the established process that's well described in the AAPS Fellows Handbook, and it will increase the likelihood for a successful nomination. Members who have been elevated to the AAPS Fellow status can use the designation FAAPS after their names in communications, biographies, CVs, and any opportunity where that designation is commonly used. And we strongly encourage the AAPS Fellows remain involved with AAPS after elevation to AAPS Fellows status. You would serve as a role model for other pharmaceutical scientists, especially trainees and students. Fellows are encouraged to share their expertise and insights through AAPS and to step forward as leaders in the organization and participate in activities that drives AAPS's mission. So I'm going to close now with a list of the current members of the AAPS Fellows Committee, and you'll see that there are chairs for each of the sections listed here. And if anyone has any questions, we would be happy to answer them. So I see that there's one question. I'll begin answering it. The question is, can an AAPS Fellows Committee member be a nominator? No. As clearly defined within the Fellows Handbook, that would present a conflict of interest for a Fellows Committee to be a nominator. Because members of the committee will be evaluating and reviewing each of the packages, so that we consider that to be a conflict of interest, and we encourage, or we require, that AAPS Fellows Committee members not be nominators. Steve or Venkat, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Jeff. It is something that has happened in the past, and it hasn't really gone that great. The reason is that, number one, it presents kind of the vision that it would be a conflict of interest, as Jeff mentioned. And I think the most important thing is you want the Fellows Committee to be impartial and to not have other information when they're doing the evaluation. And if one member of the committee is actually championing a person for nomination, it's not perceived well. And so it would be strongly encouraged that the person find a different person in their section to nominate them. And I think that it would just go much smoother, and it's just a lot cleaner process and much better for the candidate.
Okay, so we have another question, which is there a better chance for a second-time application? That's an interesting question. So I'll try it, and then if Steve or Venkat have additional information, I'll let them chime in as well. So I think the package has to stand by itself. Certainly we do know if there's been a prior application, and I think the only way that a second-time applicant would have a quote-unquote better chance is that the nominator or nominee has been through the process a little bit and may understand the process and what is required to become a successful candidate. And also, when we render an opinion of not endorsing a candidate. We give specific recommendations and information to that nominee on why we deemed the candidate not worthy of a positive vote at that time. So in that sense, there's a little bit more information that the nominee has and should have the ability to bolster their application. So but as I said, the package has to stand by itself. So Steve or Venkat, would you like to add anything to that?
Jeff, you've addressed it well.
Yeah, I think just one other comment to bring up. A lot of members don't get accepted the first time that their application is put forward to the committee. It's not uncommon. And so as long as the concerns of the committee are addressed adequately, then there's a very good chance that the second time that a person goes before the committee, they will get accepted. The challenge is if the same application is put forward both times and no changes are made, you're probably going to get the same outcome. So as long as the concerns are addressed appropriately, then I think that the person has a very good chance to get accepted for a Fellows membership on a subsequent nomination.
Yeah, so to reiterate one of Steve's key points there is the Fellows Committee gives very specific reasons for why a candidate might have been unsuccessful. So if those reasons are addressed in that resubmission, then the package absolutely should have a much better chance of being successful. So are the nominator and nominees to work together to put this package together? Absolutely. This is clearly a team effort between the nominator and the nominee. It requires a lot of interaction between those two people to put together a strong package. I don't know what else to add to that. So, Steve or Venkat?
I think it's an absolute must. Go ahead, Steve.
Go ahead, Venkat.
I think it's absolutely essential that the nominator and the nominee work together because that makes the strongest application.
Yeah, I think that it would be nice to surprise someone with a nomination for AAPS Fellow. It's just not realistic because the nominee has information that the nominator is simply not going to know. And it's not going to be thorough enough. It's not going to have as much depth and as much detail if the nominator and the nominee work very closely together and interact quite a bit on this.
Question 4. How does one get an advisor? Whom should we ask? That's an excellent question. So I would suggest to begin to ask the chair of your respective section, AAPS or the Section Fellows Committee. If you don't know who that individual is, the best way to do it is to contact AAPS directly. They can tell you who your section chair is, or right on the screen now is a list of those current section chairs, and if you know those individuals, you can contact them directly. Question 5, how many researches should be I don't understand this question. How many researches should the nominator have? Actually,
the question might be publications, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so if it's publications that you're referring to, there's no strict number of publications that we look for, but as I mentioned during the presentation, what we are looking for is a clear demonstration of sustained accomplishments and impact in your scientific field, and attainment of a significant rank, usually full professor or the equivalent within government or industry. Question 6, can I say more about the difference between the nomination and portfolio of accomplishment? Is the nomination more of a summary? Yes, and it seems like there could be some redundancy. There will be a little bit of overlap, but clearly the portfolio of accomplishment goes into more detail than a letter could. It contains much more information. And for example, when we ask you to identify 6 publications and list their contribution, to the field, identify how they impacted your field. That's a little bit more than would be evidenced in a nomination letter. The portfolio of accomplishments is a little longer and, as I said, more detailed.
Just to add to that, Jeff, it is true that there is redundancy there, but one of the things the committee looks for is to see consistency. So if the nominator says that something's really important, but that's not contained in the portfolio of accomplishments, we're left in a bit of a quandary. So we want to see consistency. We do understand that there's some redundancy, but we want to see that redundancy in the context of either the portfolio of accomplishments, a letter of recommendation, or the nominator assessment.
Can you choose more than one section for evaluation, and does the candidate need to be a primary member of a section? That's an interesting question. Clearly someone's contributions can often span more than one section, but when you join AAPS, you designate a primary section to align with, and then you have your secondary affiliations. So I think the answer is your nomination is going to be evaluated by a primary section. And if it's appropriate or necessary, someone from another section will always be the secondary reviewer. So you should select the primary section that most closely aligns with your field, and we will evaluate your portfolio and assign an appropriate secondary section. I hope that answers the question. Anything else?
No, that's
There's one more question. Is there a target number of fellows each year?
And so, no, there's not a target number. I showed the metrics for the prior few years. There is clearly variation between years, but there is no specific target number of packages or fellows per year. I put up on the screen the prior several years. You can see there's significant variation. We went from a high of 31 to a low of about 16 packages submitted.
Yeah, it's important to recognize there's no quota involved. We are not given percentage that we should have elevated to fellow. It's really each nomination package is assessed independently on its own.
And also there is no number of fellowships assigned to each of the sections. It's independent of the section.
Correct. Some associate professors have the same level of accomplishments as other full professors, and is it necessary to be a full professor to get a nomination? Clearly, different institutions have different requirements for advancement within that institution. So I would say it's most often that fellows are full professors, but not a strict requirement. And so again, what we're looking for is clear evidence of sustained level of superior and distinguished professional achievement, and some measure of the impact of that achievement. If that's been made at an associate professor level and you've been clearly successful, we would certainly consider an application from someone who's not a full professor, and that has certainly happened in the past.
I completely agree. I think a candidate will not be turned down if everything else is appropriate just because that person is an associate professor.
Yeah, it may be beneficial, though, as you're submitting that package, that the nominator acknowledge that the person is not a full professor and describe why they think that they have met the same requirements and the same protocols, if you will, that a full professor would have met. So in other words, justify that. Why is this candidate being brought forward now instead of waiting until they reach full professor? And that will help the committee understand exactly why the person should be elevated to fellow status at this point rather than waiting a couple more years till they become professor.
There seems like there are no further questions, so I'd like to conclude this webinar and thank everybody for calling in and asking good questions, and thanks to Steve and Venkat for also participating.